Not because our graduates' credentials will fail international accreditation. I mean, it's already a problem in the professional degrees, but simply because we need it. Strong and solid basic education would reduce the pressure on higher education to fill in the learning gaps. And this brings me to my final point. We, the panel, we look at the educational system as a cohesive, coherent learning web. You know, the segmentation between elementary and secondary, basic and higher, that's doing us a lot of harm. Higher ed faculty often complain about the declining quality of college entrance, but do nothing because, oh, that's not our problem, that's the problem of basic ed. But it's our problem. Why? General education has become remedial, not liberal. We dumb down foundation courses because the students didn't learn the basics. So let me propose that we as HEIs or even UP as an institution tell the DepEd, these are the competencies we expect your graduates to have when they enter us. I, for example, I expect my freshman students to be able to write essays in the language of their choice. Fairly lucid, fairly organized essays. But they can't, because objective tests in high school did not teach them that ability. So, higher education must produce college-ready standards so that the missing links of the learning web are identified. There's one other standard that HEIs can produce, and this time in tandem with business, industry, and the Civil Service Commission. Higher ed should come up with work-ready standards, especially if we are to consider the establishment of community colleges or two-year programs. Collaboration with business and industry and the civil service, that's necessary for two reasons. First, we want to change their minds about requiring college degrees for jobs that do not need them. I realize that the current quality of education and the oversupply of graduates compels companies to use a college degree as the screening off indicator. But as we improve the system, I mean, the century awaits us, hope, redemption. We also have to change mindsets that stand in the way. And a more honest appraisal of job requirements is part of this change. Second, we also need to work out equivalence measures that will allow, say, four-year colleges taking in graduates of post-secondary two-year programs with work experience to translate part of that work experience into academic credits toward a four-year degree. Higher education has to listen to business and industry to make this thing work. Finally, higher education's strongest link with basic ed, and Dina pointed this out, Principal Dina, is teacher development. We often blame basic education teachers for doing a bad job. But who trained them in the first place? In 1999, the American Council of Education produced a study called To Touch the Future, Transforming the Way Teachers Are Taught. Among others, the study called for more grounding of teacher education in the subject matter. I believe the same applies to us. Disciplinary departments have an obligation to work closely with colleges of education. That's why I teach there now. They tolerate me. Philippine Normal University's MA program in, for heaven's sake, Makabayan Studies is not the solution to the problem. Could even worsen it. Tighter collaboration between disciplines and the schools of education is the answer. And it's inexpensive to boot. So this afternoon, since Dina, Alan, and I spoke of promises made, though not quite delivered, and promises that have yet to be made. The gaps between promise and performance actually speak of the disjunction between social and professional functions and the sites they are anchored in. Drawing from the work of Ivan Illich, Parker Palmer points out, and I quote, "The functions of a profession are not necessarily those of the institutional structures that house it. The fact that we have schools does not mean we have education. The fact that we have hospitals does not mean we have health care. The fact that we have courts does not mean we have justice." So this afternoon, the four of us tried to show how schools and universities can be sites of learning. And some, in fact, are. On this redemptive note, we thank you for spending your time with us.
Our panel is now ready for questions from the audience here in UP Diliman. Since we have very limited time, please keep your questions brief and direct to the point. Please raise your hand, and when recognized, please proceed to the nearest microphone. State your name, your institutional affiliation, and your question.
No, that's you.
Dean Talisayan.
First, congratulations to our distinguished panel for a comprehensive and stimulating discussion of issues. I would like to know, since the topic tries to link BESRA and higher education, then what are the components and characteristics of BESRA that you will recommend for higher education? And conversely, what conditions of higher education would make good context for the fast implementation of BESRA?
Our talk on BESRA and Maris's talk on higher education have emphasized the need to rethink the kinds of competencies that our schools, whether basic education or higher education, should be developing. This requires us to rethink our own delivery systems, both for basic and higher education. In other words, what we see going on in BESRA is that DepEd has signaled the schools to try to experiment, to try to figure out what's the best way to attain the higher learning competencies. Higher education institutions should move more resolutely in that direction as well. I think Maris made a good point that we cannot just maintain the status quo and maintain the one-size-fits-all approaches in higher education now. And perhaps higher education should move towards becoming much more bold in rethinking what it should be doing, how it should be doing it, and so on.
No, we were just saying that if BESRA works and you have functional literate and critical thinkers, because BESRA is not just functional literacy is producing critical thinkers, and our higher education institutions remain where they are, then some of them won't have any place to go. I think Maris's suggestion earlier about having a diversified higher education system will also give your graduates of non-formal and formal schools alternatives. I think the whole idea is moving. We should be able to move in this century. You should be able to move from the non-formal to the formal, get equivalencies. I guess that's the system that will have to be set up. That's why there should be collaboration between the basic education sector and the higher education sector. The other one is colleges of education, I think, are far behind. I mean, they have not kept up with all of these changes. So in many ways, I'm not sure, maybe UP has kept up, but in many ways, I think that whole paradigm shift to learning from education to learning, is something that might not yet have been picked up by our colleges of education. But anyway, I'm not in the College of Education. You are an adjunct.
But you join me. I'm asking the dean.
The other thing I think that is important to bridge, not really bridge, because Maris explicitly said that she's not advocating for a HESRA in the way.
No, I didn't. I said I wouldn't do that.
So no, she cannot do it alone. So the important thing I think is that for the higher education group or the HESRA people who will think about that, they have to be able to show that certain disciplines have their own content, their own methodologies, and these already should be taught in basic ed. No? So curriculum is an important thing, the linking of curriculum and the ways of thinking. The other one I think that's really good with BESRA is that if allowed to prosper, there will be many variations of BESRA. there will be many types of manifestations of how things will be attained and achieved. And that's exactly how higher ed should be. It should be, in Maris's words, a heteronomy.
Thank you very much. We are now ready for the next question.